You know, when we think of famous people from history, we picture these epic lives, right? Grand battles, world-changing speeches, statues built in their honor. But what if the very last page of their story wasn't epic at all? What if it was just plain weird? Turns out, history has a pretty twisted sense of humor.
Right, we spend so much time studying how these people lived, but we kind of gloss over the end. And what happens when that end isn't just tragic, but downright bizarre? We're about to dive into the moments when the great, the powerful, and the famous met ends so strange, you'd think they were made up.
You'd think being a king, with all the power and prestige, would at least save you from life's most ridiculous accidents. Well, you'd be wrong. So first up, let's look at some monarchs whose crowns offered zero protection from just pure, comical bad luck.
Okay, meet King Louis III. It's the year 881, and this guy is on top of the world. He's just a teenager, but he's already famous for beating the Vikings in a huge battle. So, feeling pretty good about himself, he spots a young woman he fancies. When she runs off towards her father's house, he does what you might expect a young, impulsive king to do. He jumps on his horse and gives chase. Here's the thing though, in his heroic pursuit, Louis forgot to duck. He slammed his head so hard on the stone lintel of a low doorway that he fractured his skull. And, well, that was it. The mighty warrior who defeated over 9,000 Vikings was taken out by some shoddy architectural planning. Unbelievable.
All right, now let's hop over to Scotland in 1460. King James II was a huge fan of military tech, and he especially loved his cannons. To celebrate a recent victory, he wanted to fire off his absolute favorite, a massive cannon he called the Lion. Now, what's the one thing you probably shouldn't do when firing a giant primitive cannon? You guessed it, he stood right next to it to get the best view. The cannon, which was apparently not in a good mood, just exploded on the very first shot. A piece of shrapnel flew off and killed him instantly.
And if you thought that was an undignified way to go, get a load of this. King Edmund Ironside of England was this legendary warrior, famous for his incredible toughness against Danish invaders. He survived one brutal battle after another. But his end didn't come on the battlefield. Oh no. It came in the year 1016 while he was in the outhouse. An assassin, in a move that shows some serious, if disgusting, dedication, hid down in the cesspit and stabbed the king from below while he was at his most, well, you know. So, before our next royal story, we need a quick biology lesson. This thing here, this is a lamprey. It's basically a parasitic, jawless fish that latches onto other animals with that funnel-like mouth to feed. Yeah, not exactly an appetizer you'd order, right? Well, don't tell that to King Henry I of England. He was obsessed with them, absolutely adored them. So much, in fact, that when his own doctor told him, hey, maybe stop eating the parasitic fish, they're making you sick, he completely ignored the advice and scarfed down a huge plate of them anyway. Sure enough, he died from food poisoning in 1135, all for the love of a slimy, blood-sucking fish. But hey, it's not just kings and queens who suffer these ridiculous fates. Sometimes it really feels like the universe just has a bizarre sense of humor. This next section is all about those cosmically unlucky folks, people whose final moments were so ironic it feels like someone had to have written them as a joke. 4.5 feet. That's about 1.5 meters. Just think about that number for a second. What on earth could be that long and also lead to someone's death? A beard. We're talking about a man whose greatest asset literally became his fatal flaw. Hans Steininger was the mayor of a town in Austria, and he was famous for one thing, his incredible beard. He usually kept it all rolled up in a leather pouch, but one day in 1567, a fire broke out. In the panic to escape, he forgot to tuck his beard away, tripped over it while running down the stairs, and broke his neck. And then there's this guy, Bobby Leach, a professional daredevil, a man who literally threw himself over Niagara Falls in a barrel and walked away. He spent years performing all these death-defying stunts. So how did his story end? Well, in 1926, he was just walking down a street in New Zealand and he slipped on an orange peel. The fall broke his leg, the wound got infected with gangrene, and that is what finally killed him. After everything he survived, he was taken out by a piece of fruit. Okay, picture this. Ancient Greece, 3rd century BC. The philosopher Chrysippus is watching a donkey eat some figs from a tree. And feeling pretty clever, he turns to his friend and cracks a joke. He says, "Give the donkey some pure wine to wash down the figs." And apparently, to him, this was the single funniest joke ever told. Chrysippus started laughing and just couldn't stop.
He laughed so uncontrollably that he went into convulsions and died. And believe it or not, while it's super rare, dying from laughter is a real medically documented phenomenon. He was literally killed by his own punchline.
All right, for our final section, we are diving into the absolute masters of irony. These are the people whose deaths were so tragically, so perfectly connected to their life's work that you just can't make this stuff up. Imagine you're sitting on a jury back in 1871. A lawyer, Clement Vallandigham, is defending a man accused of murder. And to make his point, he stands up and says this to the courtroom, getting ready to demonstrate his whole theory of the case. So his entire argument was that the victim wasn't murdered at all. He'd accidentally shot himself while trying to draw his pistol from his pocket. And to show the jury just how plausible this was, Vallandigham decided he was going to do a live reenactment right there in front of everyone. I mean, it's a dramatic, surefire way to make a memorable point with the jury. What could possibly go wrong? Well, instead of picking up the unloaded prop gun he had set aside for the demonstration, he accidentally grabbed the actual loaded gun from the evidence table. He performed the reenactment perfectly, fatally shooting himself in the process. He died the next day. But here's the kicker. His demonstration was so convincing that the jury acquitted his client. He literally won the case from beyond the grave. Or how about Franz Reichelt, a tailor with a truly noble dream, to invent a wearable parachute suit that could save the lives of pilots. After a few tests with dummies, he became so confident in his invention that he scheduled the ultimate live test. And who was the test subject? Himself, of course. In 1912, he jumped off the first deck of the Eiffel Tower, and his invention completely failed. He plummeted to his death in front of a crowd of spectators and cameras.
And finally, we have the story of Dr. Jesse Lazier. Back in 1900, the idea that yellow fever was spread by mosquitoes was a new theory, and a lot of people mocked it. To prove it once and for all, Lazier and his team needed a human volunteer to be bitten by an infected mosquito, so he bravely volunteered himself. And the experiment was a total success. He got sick, proving the theory was correct. Tragically, he died from the disease just days later, a true martyr to the very science he helped prove.
So, after all these wild stories of killer beards, fatal jokes, and self-inflicted legal victories, what's the actual point? What do these strange endings really tell us about history?
Well, these stories do a lot more than just make us chuckle. They completely humanize the past. They remind us that behind all the stone-faced portraits and epic titles, we're just people. Real, flawed, and sometimes incredibly unlucky people, just like us. A king can be defeated by a doorway, a brilliant daredevil can be taken out by an orange peel. In the end, death really is the great equalizer, and sometimes it has a really dark sense of humor.
And all of this leaves us with one pretty sobering thought, doesn't it? We spend our entire lives trying to write our own stories, to control our own narratives, but none of us gets to write that final line. So it really makes you wonder, what will your final story be?